Assalamualaikum. A very good day to you guys. Today, we are going to present you with some video about inflation and unemployment. Do you guys know, in December 2019, COVID-19 first cases in Wuhan City, China? The WHO declared only as global health emergency in January 2020. By 11 March 2020, WHO declared COVID-19 as global pandemic. This in a century millions of deaths, business failure, school closing, and many more impact, and bring to economic crisis. Based on this scenario, we are going to discuss the two countries in cope the macroeconomic problem about inflation and unemployment during these pandemic phases. Now, let's get to know New Zealand. Do you know the island nation of New Zealand is located in Western Pacific Ocean? Over 700 smaller islands constitute its two land masses, the North Island and the South Island. By area, it is the sixth larger island nation, with a total land area of 268,021 square kilometers. It lies about 2,000 kilometers east of Australia across the Tasman Sea. The country's varied geography is largely due to volcanic eruption and tectonic uplift over thousands of years.
Hey everyone, do you guys know that Brazil is the fifth biggest country in the world and largest country in South America? It is most well known for its dense forests, including the Amazon, the world's largest jungle. The Brazilian landscape is very varied with large marshes, rocky hills, dry grassland, and enormous plateaus.
Hi, you guys know what the definition of inflation? Inflation is the loss of currency purchasing power over time. A unit of currency effectively buys less as a result of the increase in pricing. There are three types of inflation, which are built-in, cost-push, and demand-pull inflation. The Consumer Price Index and the Wholesale Price Index are the two most often used inflation index.
Now, we are going to talk about inflation in New Zealand. The annual rate of inflation in New Zealand has been outpacing non-tradable inflation since middle 2021. Tradable inflation accounts for about 40% of New Zealand's overall inflation, but the pace at which it's growing means external sources are increasingly fueling inflationary pressure. Next, New Zealand's annual inflation rate topped at three-decade high at the end of last year. The Consumer Price Index (CPI) rose by 5.9% for the last 3 months of 2021. That was higher than expected, and it made almost certain that the Reserve Bank of New Zealand will take further steps to curb rising living costs. However, prices for housing, construction, and rental housing jumped, including petrol prices, also increased by 30%. The rate of increasing is expected to rise further in the year to the last quarter of 2021.
Do you guys want to know that since 2016, inflation has been on the decline and the recession has made that tendency even more pronounced? Inflation is still near to the existing objective of 4%, which is expected to decrease to 3.75% in 2021 and 3.5% in 2022. Significant monetary easing has become possible due to inflation that is below goal.
Do you guys have any idea what is the reason of inflation in New Zealand? The reason of inflation in New Zealand is cooperative economic and social activities were deliberately limited to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The risks to the world economy were substantially skewed in the direction of decline at the beginning of 2020. New Zealand faced a material threat of experiencing a prolonged period of below-target consumer price inflation, and employment level well below any estimate of maximum sustainable level. The cost of living in New Zealand is definitely rising as inflation reached a three-decade high. Consumer Price Index, as we know CPI, inflation rose to 5.9% in the 12 months leading up to December 2021. Price increases has been led by the essential goods and services such as food, housing, and transport. Due to the pandemic, annual food costs were 4.5% higher in December 2021 than a year earlier.
The reason why Brazilian inflation rate increased because of the Brazilian government's action against the COVID-19 pandemic had a significant impact on the country's economy, with output falling by 9.6% in the second quarter of this year compared to the first quarter. The central bank's action were impacted by the necessity to increase spending as a result of the pandemic reduction in output and consumption and its deflationary effect, which caused the inflation rate to fall below target. The third quarter saw a 6.3% growth in the economy's largest sector, which is services, which had contracted by 10.4% in the previous quarter. Within the services sector, the pandemic had a particularly detrimental impact on travel, tourism, personal services, and air transport businesses.
How to decrease inflation rate? Inflation is generally controlled by the central bank and the government. The main policy used is monetary policy with changing interest rate. However, there are a variety of tools to control inflation, including monetary policy, higher interest rate reduce demand in the economy leading to lower economic growth. Tight fiscal policy will reduce aggregate demand due to increased income tax and reduce government spending. The regulation and stalling may assist lower corporate costs, which will lower inflation. Do you guys know unemployment is an important indicator of the health of the economy is unemployment. Unemployment can be classified as fractional, cyclical, structural, or institutional. Very low employment rates may indicate an overheating economy. High unemployment rates indicate a distressed economy. The unemployment rate is determined by dividing the number of unemployed persons by the total labor force.
Okay, now we are going to talk about unemployment rate in New Zealand. Unemployment rate rose from 4.0% to 5.3% in September 2020 quarter. Biggest quarterly growth also observed for unemployment rate. People's inability to be actively seeking for work during national lockdown. This is the biggest quarterly increase on record before coronavirus restriction took hold. Do you guys know New Zealand started from a good position by OECD standard with a relatively low unemployment rate? Fortunately, the government's comprehensive wage subsidy scheme has so far limited the spike in unemployment. In March 2020, the unemployment rate was about 4.2%, slightly up on 4.0% in December 2019. New Zealand imposed one of the strictest COVID-19 shutdown in the world in late of March.
Okay, next for the unemployment. In early crisis of pandemic COVID-19, Brazil's unemployment rate rose from 11% to 12.2% in the 3 months leading up to March 2020. Although it was still lower than the market's projection of 12.5% due to business lockdown and closures brought on by the coronavirus pandemic. Employment fell by 2.5% to 92.22 million and number of employed people increased by 10.5%, but the employment rate decreased by 1.6% points to 51.6%.
Do you guys know what the reason is? The reason of unemployment in New Zealand is when the unemployment rate in New Zealand expected to increase significantly in 2021. The increase is consistent with allegation of a labor shortage, significant employee turnover, and ongoing travel restriction on foreign visitors. Key labor market indicators reveal a tight labor market with employment at all-time high. However, there has been an increase in the number of jobs getting large pay rises as businesses trying to attract and retain staff in an increasingly tight labor market. Construction, education, training, healthcare, and social assistance were the three industries that contributed most significantly to an index annual growth this quarter. Collective bargaining agreements in the public sector will continue to have an impact on annual pay inflation until 2021 and 2022.
And for the reasons of unemployment in Brazil is linked to a decline in disposable income and aggregate consumption, which leads to several other economic and social problems. It is also a sign of the success or failure of economic policies put in place by governments, as is demonstrated by Brazil's recent dismal economic performance. In light of this, it is determined that the restart of employment won't be simple to verify in the near future.
Do you guys have any idea about how to decrease unemployment rate? There are many ways to improve the working of the labor market in matching people to available jobs. Apprenticeship scheme policies aim to provide the unemployed with the new skills they need to find fresh employment. Targeted measures to improve people's incentive might include linking welfare benefits to participation in work experience programs. As a conclusion, New Zealand's annual inflation rate topped a 3-decade high at the end of last year. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, rose by 5.9% for the last 3 months of 2021, the fastest rate since mid-2021. Annual inflation has been outpacing non-tradable inflation, with the rising price of goods and services we produce and consume domestically for 6.9%. For Brazil, the country has a 13.6% unemployment rate. In the middle of the coronavirus crisis, it was the highest unemployment rate since the 3 months ending in March 2019. The number of unemployed people continued to rise by 7.5% to 12.81 million. Since 2016, inflation has been on the decline, and the recession has made the tendency even more pronounced. Bye!